In today's video, we're going to be having a look at the GCSE Spanish writing exam and focusing on the 90-word question. So firstly, what does the 90-word question look like? The 90-word question is worth 16 marks and comes up on the foundation and the higher paper. There'll be two 90-word questions for you to choose from in your writing exam paper. So let's have a look at a little example here. Tienes una nueva amiga chilena. Te ha mandado unas preguntas sobre tu instituto. So this says you have a new Chilean friend and she has sent you some questions about your school. Escríbele un email, write her an email. The first thing I wanted to say here is that even though it says write her an email, you do not have to format your response in the form of an email. So you don't have to say to and then the name of your new Chilean friend. And you don't have to say from at the bottom and your name. I wanted to mention that because every year my GCSE students always get a little bit confused by that. You can simply just write a short paragraph in response to the 4 bullet points without having to format it like an email. So there will be 4 bullet points. There will most likely be a bullet point that asks for an opinion. So in this example, it's the second bullet point, which says, tu opinión sobre las normas en tu instituto. And there will be most likely be a bullet point which requires a past tense response. In this case, it's the first bullet point. ¿Qué hiciste en tus clases de español la semana pasada? What did you do in your Spanish classes last week? And there will most likely be another bullet point which requires a future tense response. And in this case, it's the last bullet point which says, ¿Qué te gustaría estudiar en el futuro? What would you like to study in the future? Tip 1. Get to know the mark scheme. So there are 2 parts to the mark scheme for the 90-word question. The first part is content, which is worth 10 marks, and the second part is quality of language, which is worth 6 marks. What I've done here is I've just taken some of the key messages from the top band for each of these, for content and for quality of language. So for content, what you need to get full marks in this is to make sure that you cover all bullet points, that your communication is clear, and that you include at least 2 opinions. I'll go into some more detail about some of these points later on in the video. And for quality of language, what you need to do to get full marks in this is make sure you include a variety of vocabulary, complex structures, 3 tenses, and make sure it's accurate. Again, if you've never heard of complex structures before, later on in the video I'll give you some examples of those. Tip 2. Take a moment to choose. So don't rush into choosing your 90-word question straight away. Remember, you have 2 choices. Take a moment to decide which one. Firstly, do you 100% understand what all the bullet points mean? And secondly, do you have some key ideas for each of those bullet points that you can definitely communicate in Spanish? So just take a moment before you decide. Tip 3. Create a checklist. So what I always ask my GCSE students to do is before they're about to start their 90-word piece of writing, I get them to just create this little checklist. And as you can see, these 5 things are really important if you think about what we've just discussed in the mark scheme. So we've got past tense, future tense, developed opinions, complex structures, and I like to add show-off structures as well. As you can see, I get them to write or just draw out 3 boxes next to each of these key elements. As my students are writing out their 90-word piece of writing, I just get them to tick off if they have included one of these elements in their 90-word piece of writing. And as you can see, this is a great guide because if you get halfway through and you've still not included the future tense or you've still not included any complex structures, you can look back and just make sure that you include them. So I really like to encourage this for my GCSE students. For the show-off structures, what what I'll do is I'll just link above to a recent video I made on some useful exam structures and some grade 9 show-off phrases so that you can see that that's a really easy way to include those show-off structures. Tip 4, include complex structures. So AQA classes the following categories as complex structures. We have different tenses, intensifiers, subordinate clauses, or infinitive constructions. So running up to the GCSE exams, obviously it's really important for you to revise your different tenses. But if you are a few days away, here are some key structures that could be really useful to you. So we have fui, I went, hice, I did, era, it was, or for future time frames, we've got voy a plus your infinitive, so I'm going to do something, or we've got me gustaría plus your infinitive is I would like to do something. For intensifiers, some examples could be un poco, a little, muy, very, bastante, quite, or demasiado, too or too much. So for example, if I were to say es demasiado caro, it means it's too expensive. So for the subordinate clauses, and this is where you can really show off. So subordinate clauses, quite simply put, are just extending your sentences. And you can create those subordinate clauses by adding some of these connectives in the boxes here. So in terms of how to extend a sentence, we could add donde, where, que, that, or cuando, when. One of my favourite ways to extend my sentences would be to say, for example, me gusta ir al centro de la ciudad. I like to go to the city centre. Donde, so using where, donde se puede ir de compras. So donde se puede is a useful phrase where you can go shopping in this case. Or we have the connective ya que, dado que, and puesto que, which means because or given that. Or we have these two last connectives, which are really useful to extend your sentences. Por ejemplo, for example, and aunque, although. And finally, we have some infinitive constructions. So these are sentence starters which must be followed by the infinitive. So we have suelo, I usually. Tengo la intención de, I intend. And se puede, you can or one can. Tip 5, add synonyms. So a synonym is simply a word or phrase that means exactly the same as another word or phrase. And if you remember when we looked at the mark scheme, to get the top marks for quality of language, you need to include a variety of vocabulary. So we don't want to be repeating the same structures and words in our writing exam. So here are some examples of how you can just use a different word or phrase, which means the same thing, to up your mark for quality of language. So instead of me gusta, could we say something like me chifla? Or instead of no me gusta, could we use no aguanto or no soporto, which means I can't stand something? Or instead of divertido, could we use gracioso or chistoso, which both mean fun or funny? And instead of aburrido, could we use tedioso, like tedious? If you're really struggling to think of different synonyms for your opinion phrases and your adjectives, just have a little look on my channel and go to my YouTube shorts because I've included loads of examples of different synonyms. Tip 6, structure matters. So, as we've discussed when we looked at the mark scheme, to get the full marks for content, you have to make sure you answer all the bullet points. If I were you, just to make it 100% clear to the examiner, I would structure my 90-word piece of writing so that for the first bullet point, I write a short paragraph and then I would leave a gap underneath that paragraph. Then I would answer the second bullet point and then I would leave a gap under that one. And then I'd answer the third bullet point and leave a gap. and then I'd answer the fourth bullet point. By gap, I just mean one line on your A4 sheet of paper. You don't want to give the examiner an excuse not to see that you have definitely answered that bullet point. So make sure you structure your writing really carefully. Tip 8, proofread your work. So as we saw from the mark scheme, accuracy and clarity are really important. So definitely take some time after you finish writing your 90-word question to carefully read through your work. Check those verb endings, check the spellings. Is everything clear? Is the information nice and clear for the examiner? And taking that time to proofread is definitely worth it. Thank you for watching, and please do subscribe for weekly videos giving lots of tips to help you with your GCSE Spanish. Bye!